We need to decipher if this rumor, of which there have been many over the years, does this rumor have merit? Does it have more merit? Does it have more gravitas than what we've heard in the past? And I'm going to try to give you reasons why I think it actually does. She effectively tossed the Star Wars film franchise into a Death Star trash compactor with 3 high-grossing yet increasingly desperate and disjointed Skywalker movies, plus 2 spin-offs, and a parade of high-profile development that led to scrapped projects and disgruntled creatives.
Renegade Online.
It's been a hell of a long time. Well, at least by Disney math, it's been about 13 years. But you know what? To the rest of the Star Wars fans, when it comes to Kathleen Kennedy's rule, tyrannical rule over Star Wars,
it's been 84 years.
Pretty much. It felt like a long time. It still feels like a long time, and it doesn't feel like it's necessarily going to get a whole lot better. But it seems, at least as of right now, with articles like this coming out, and we're going to discuss the reason that I think this is real this time is because of the source. You have to look at things from all sides. But as it stands right now, according to Matt Bellany, Kathleen Kennedy's...
not going to work here anymore anyway.
Yeah, so we're going to go through all angles on this. And probably no matter what I say, maybe somewhere near half the crowd in this chat is going to disagree with my assessment of things. And I'm going to, again, take this from multiple angles. So hopefully I'll just go ahead and maybe piss off everyone today.
Let me start out by saying this. If I offend anybody today, I don't give a shit.
It's been 13 years since the girls at Lucasfilm took over and ran this franchise into the dirt. And if there's been one piece of advice that folks like us out here in the real Star Wars fandom that have been around for decades, generations, and quite frankly, billions and billions and billions of dollars in revenue, real actual profits, well, that message to the girls has been this:
try harder not to suck.
I wish they would have listened. And as it stands right now, we do want to try to give Kathleen Kennedy her due. We want to try to be respectful. But at the same time, part of me can't help but already get this show demonetized.
It's the best day ever.
Now, a lot of you in the chat are already saying what I think most of us feel, and that is, even if it's true, does it really matter? Or you're outright stating that it doesn't matter. And in many respects, you are probably right. But again, we're going to speak to both sides of that. I think there's a lot of validity to that argument, and certainly given the state of Star Wars, where it is now and where it has been the last several years, it's very difficult to argue against that. Then again, this is 2025. Donald Trump just got reelected to the presidency of the United States of America. The left and woke is on the run. Even if going into hiding, it's taken at least 2 or 3 steps back. People are pushing back on this kind of stuff. And maybe, just maybe, there is hope even for Disney as it looks towards not only perhaps new leadership at Lucasfilm, but definitely new leadership at the top chair. When Bob Iger leaves in about a year, maybe there is going to be pressure put on the CEO and the chairman as opposed to the other way around, with investors, with somebody new in the top seat. We need to decipher if this rumor, of which there have been many over the years, does this rumor have merit? Does it have more merit? Does it have more gravitas than what we've heard in the past? And I'm going to try to give you reasons why I think it actually does. But again, I'm not going to sit here and try to change people's minds on whether or not they want to give Star Wars another chance. That's not necessarily the objective of this show. I'm just as frustrated as everybody else. I've largely checked out. It's probably been a year or two since I sat and watched the real Star Wars movies from 77 to 83, just because the current state of the whole thing is so depressing that all it does is remind me how bad things are right now and how much it's been trashed. I can't fix that in everybody's mind. What we can talk about from the business side of things is what this story means. Is it really going to happen, or do we think it's really going to happen? And then why? Try to be as pragmatic as possible, but also understanding that we're all fans of the original Star Wars. We've got to get through how we got to this point, but let's start here with the story here. This was from Puck. This broke late last night. Kathleen Kennedy to step down at Lucasfilm. After a 13-year run, the legendary movie producer has informed Disney, as well as friends and associates, that she will exit as Lucasfilm president by the end of the year. Now, let me stop, because I can hear the groans out there in the chat, and they've already been many. And I get it. I'm with you. Hear me out. We've heard this kind of story many times before, have we not? So what makes this different? Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is that this is reported from Puck. You may not have heard of Puck. Puck is not big on the internet in terms of public viewing. It's a subscription-based service. I think it's still about $100 a year. It's a very much inside baseball Hollywood type trade. In fact, the man who wrote this article, you can see here, Matt Bellany, formerly of The Hollywood Reporter, as a matter of fact. He definitely has his connections. And I've spoken to Matt Bellany briefly in the past. This was probably about a year or two ago now, where I made sure it was okay that we cited his articles or showed his articles on this show and in videos, because, again, a lot of his stuff is behind a paywall, but you can get a couple of free articles to try out Puck if you like. Now, I'm not trying to stump for Puck here, per se. But I am trying to be fair, because they are the ones that broke this story. So good on them for that. Now, politically, there's probably a lot of things I don't agree with at the guys at Puck, but it is a Hollywood trade. So you can imagine where their political persuasions tend to gravitate. But in this case, a guy like Matt Bellany, who wrote an article probably 2 years ago now about a man named Alan Horn. For those of you who don't know who Alan Horn is, he was the predecessor to Alan Bergman and Dana Walden at the Walt Disney Company. Alan Horn was the chairman of the Walt Disney Company studio system. In other words, Alan Horn, before he retired for 10 years, was Kathleen Kennedy's boss, her direct superior. Just as Alan Bergman is Kathleen Kennedy's boss and direct superior now. Bergman and Horn answered to Bob Iger, and for 11 months they answered to Bob Chapek, somewhere in there. The point is, when everybody was speculating what Horn was doing when he was going to retire from Disney, Matt Bellany got tired of listening to the speculation. He picked up the phone and he called Alan Horn on his personal cell phone number and asked him to go to lunch. And from that lunch came an article that Bellany penned in Puck magazine. So when I tell you that Matt Bellany knows people, I'm not talking about some low or mid-level dink at Lucasfilm or Disney. Matt Bellany personally knows and can personally reach C-suite level people at Disney without question. And I do not think, in fact, I know that Matt Bellany would not go to bat with an article like this unless he either knew this was 100% factual or had an incredibly high degree of confidence in this being the real deal. Now, does that mean that something can't change between now and later this year? It doesn't. Something could happen. But from the standpoint of the veracity of this article, I believe what Matthew is about to tell us, because I know his pedigree and I know his professional track record. It is virtually unquestionable. It's happening, Bellany says. After years of speculation and polite urging from observers like me, and Bellany has been a critic, and I do mean a critic of Kathleen Kennedy in recent years, just as we have. Bear that in mind. Kathleen Kennedy has informed Disney, as well as friends and associates, that she will exit Lucasfilm or as Lucasfilm president by the end of the year, per 3 sources that Bellany spoke to. Disney and Kennedy's personal publicist declined any comment. So let's start right there. He's got 3 sources, and I'm telling you that these 3 sources are probably not the maid, the mailman, and the greengrocer. This is probably somebody in the C-suite. You could even easily speculate, given that this is coming from Bellany, that one of these sources may be Alan Bergman. If he was able to reach out and go have lunch with Alan Horn at the flip of a coin and a phone call, he probably has a somewhat similar relationship, I suppose, with Alan Bergman. It may have come from somebody in his office. We don't know for sure, but these are the kind of people that Bellany knows. He runs in these circles. Now, Kennedy and her publicist declining to comment, well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? If it were true and it got out a little early, or this wasn't the time when Kennedy was ready to make the announcement herself, then they would decline to comment at the time. What also could be held as being a bit suspect is the fact that, again, this is Matt Bellany reaching out. This is not a nobody. This is a very well-known, very well-respected journalist in Hollywood. If he calls the office at Lucasfilm for the publicist or Kennedy herself, they could simply answer that Ms. Kennedy has no plans to retire at the end of this year, or Ms. Kennedy has not made any decisions yet. They simply told Matt Bellany that we have no comment at this time. That in of itself seems a little suspect. I mean, imagine for a moment if somebody called up Bob Iger's office in the C-suite and said, hey, we've heard a rumor that Bob Iger is stepping down before the annual shareholder meeting or right after. And you simply got a response of Bob Iger has no comment about that at this time. That in and of itself would be suspect. Instead of just saying, no, Bob is not talking about that. No, Bob hasn't made any decisions anywhere like that. Or things are in discussion. No, just no comment. When you say no comment, that usually tends to raise the antennas of people on the other end. And again, coming from the source it's coming from, I tend to buy it. Original Puck readers know that I've been critical of Kennedy's record at Lucasfilm, and she gets credit for reinventing Star Wars for streaming with The Mandalorian. Sorry, that was hiding behind me. But the hit rate on the Disney Plus series has been low, especially considering the cost of the shows. Not a huge shock, he says, but Kathleen Kennedy will be 72 in June. And this is something that we've said since she's turned 70, thinking that she's got to be pulling the retirement trigger somewhere. She's not going to be humiliated by Disney and fired and frog marched out the front door in handcuffs for crimes against Star Wars. She was always going to be graciously celebrated. Matter of fact, we speculated for years that you'd pretty much know that Kathleen Kennedy was on her way out the door when she started taking Lifetime Achievement Awards. By the way, I do find it a little humorous that this leak is coming out today with no comment from Kathleen Kennedy, and I believe the Oscars are just about a week away. Are they not? Maybe 2? What if Kennedy walks out on stage and is presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award? At that point, that you can bet your ass that this story is 100% dead on balls accurate. I don't know if that will happen at the Oscars this year. Maybe it'll be next if she sticks around through the end of this year, be that October, which is when her contract usually comes up for renewal, and there's more in the story about that, or if it's going to be all the way through December. But she ran Lucasfilm for 13 years as George Lucas's hand-picked steward under Disney. Kathy was actually planning to leave last year, I'm told, and had even set up an exit interview with a journalist, but she decided to stay for one more year. Now, how about that? That would seem to jive with some of the rumors that we heard last year, that come October, following a shortened renewal of a year or two, that she would be exiting after Indiana Jones 5, which was a complete disaster. Now, that one was in 2023. That came and went. Last year came and went, and Kennedy stuck around. Something didn't jive with a lot of the information that we were getting. Now, Matt Bellany at Puck, again, who I have no reason to distrust given his incredible track record with these kind of things, is saying that she was actually planning to leave and even had an interview scheduled with a journalist. And I have a feeling that he knows exactly who that journalist is and may even be one of the sources for this story, corroborated by, I suspect, C-suite folks at the Walt Disney Company. Please help me welcome from Rasmussen Reports, the one, the only, the great numbers man, Mark Mitchell, because I know you kind of have some interesting takes on Kennedy and what her role is. And it fits it, dude. Yeah. Some of the, as I mentioned earlier, some of this may be having to do with the fact that Trump won. And Hollywood is not in a happy place right now. And Kennedy is 72. And there's nowhere left for her to go. So I think...
Yeah, I think it's mostly Trump.
Yeah, I think she's probably a very unhappy person right now because we know what the rest of Hollywood is looking like and what they felt like. The hit rate on the Disney Plus series has been low, and I think that's Matt Bellany being very, very kind on this. It's been excruciatingly low. It's basically been Mando Season 1 and Mando Season 2, and everything else has, I mean, it's just been a mess for them. Very, very low viewership. Extraordinarily high costs. We covered recently how Forbes magazine has tracked that Andor, who's got its second season coming out here in a few weeks, Andor, they've already spent over $600 million on that show, according to the financial returns filed in the United Kingdom. And that's season 1 and 2, to be fair, but still $600 million is an enormous amount of money for 2 seasons of a show. I mean, we're talking like Rings of Power level, what the hell? And I think that's been a big part of this. And of course, they're just not delivering the numbers. The ratings for these shows keep getting destroyed by your average Netflix movie, you know, your random average new Netflix movie every Friday when it comes out. She effectively tossed the Star Wars film franchise into a Death Star trash compactor with 3 high-grossing, yet increasingly desperate and disjointed Skywalker movies, plus 2 spin-offs, and a parade of high-profile development that led to scrapped projects and disgruntled creatives. Ask a top creator about their experience working with Lucasfilm, and you'll likely get an earful. Unclear direction, paralyzed decision-making, extreme aversion to creative risks, and yet also slavish devotion to a fan base that has become increasingly toxic, not great. You know, the problem with, I think, with that statement is, and this is where Star Wars screwed up, and the girls at Star Wars screwed up, because it's been run overwhelmingly by women since 2012, because that's who she wanted to have in there with her, was a bunch of other women. The Force is female. I think the problem is the fan base that they had a slavish devotion to was the wrong fan base. It was the fan base that they somewhat artificially created with the sequel trilogy movies. You got the Reylos out there. You got these teenage girls screaming about it. The Gen Xers, our generation, Mark, we checked out. There was nothing left. In other words, the fan base that actually made this franchise worth, in part of at least the $4 billion that Disney paid for it. Because again, they also got Industrial Lights and Magic as part of that $4 billion. They got Skywalker Sound. They got some other things in there too. Of course, Indiana Jones was part of that. But Star Wars was the bulk of it. Star Wars was the big chunk of the value of $4 billion that shareholders were, in my opinion, conned into agreeing to buy or going along with Iger on that purchase. Because that fan base that they're saying they catered to, they never catered to it, because Star Wars, when it was bought by Disney, was sold to Disney shareholders as something that Disney was buying for the boys. Disney had a great hold on female demographics, young girls. They had the Disney princesses. Disney had that locked up. What they didn't have was anything that was evergreen or multi-generational for the boys. They had a brief flash in the pan with Cars from Pixar, but that didn't hold. So Disney went out and spent $4 billion on Marvel and $4 billion more on Star Wars because they needed something for the boys. Now, Marvel already had an architecture in place, thanks to Jon Favreau, that took it up through the Infinity War saga, or up through the first Avengers movie and then into the Infinity War saga. Of course, we found out, after the architecture fell apart and there was nothing left after it, and Kevin Feige kind of did whatever he wanted to do, it fell in the gutter. Star Wars, they never had a plan that they had committed to before they bought it. It was a wide open door. And Kathleen Kennedy was put in charge, decided, hey, I know that you guys told all the stockholders that we were doing this for the boys, but screw that. I don't want to do that anymore. We want to change this into a female franchise. We all know how that went.
Put another gay diverse woman in it. Make it more f***ing lit. I had a dream that I was replaced by a diverse woman. Will you check under the bed and make sure there's no Disney executives under there?
I promise there's not.
Will you please just look and make sure Kathleen Kennedy isn't under my bed?
And of course, how can we ever forget
The power of one, the power of two.
power.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.